I'm Julie Campbell, and I manage nonprofit partnerships at Share Charlotte. And I'm so happy you're all here. Crystal and I have started this conversation about this workshop literally a year ago. So this is a year in the making, and even best laid plans, right? Crystal landed right smack dab in her vacation. So I'm really so grateful that you're here. Thank you for leading us and for being such an amazing consultant and friend and advocate of so many people in the nonprofit community, including Share Charlotte. So we're grateful to you. And just a quick reminder, we have our August Share a Latte, as most of you know, but for those of you who don't, we host a networking coffee every month. And we invite an influential Charlottean to share something that would be interesting to the broader nonprofit community. And next Thursday morning, Jamie Bowler at WBTV and his team are gonna talk to us about the changing landscape of media right now and how to pitch a story, what's interesting. So I think it's going to be amazing. So please join us for that. If you haven't already registered, I think Sarah just put the link in the chat. So Crystal, we have so much to talk about this morning. I'm gonna actually go ahead and turn it over to you to get us started. Thank you for leading us this morning in this conversation.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Thanks to Julie. Thank you and Share Charlotte for inviting me to be a part of this. We always have these great conversations about what can we do, what can we talk about, what's going on locally. And so she says it's been a year in the making. So I don't want you to, don't set your standards too high around what we come up with. It was just that we came up with this, we were talking last year about just how much has changed, what was going on in the local environment, particularly in the nonprofit sector. And, you know, we were just trying to think of things. What are things that we should be highlighting? What are things that we need to be bringing to the table as far as conversations locally within our nonprofit sector? And given that, you know, again, we were having this conversation, I think it was last August or September, we said maybe, you know, we can take a look at what's going to be happening, you know, a year from now, and really take a look at, you know, for August and Black Philanthropy Month, what can we highlight, and particularly around the things that we were hearing with regards to board diversity and the lean that was happening really on the social sector and the nonprofit sector, given everything that happened around the, as I call the pause or the slowdown due to the pandemic. That was where the conversation started. And we just, you know, we dusted it off, you know, a couple months ago, and we're like, yep, it's still relevant. It's still actually really relevant content and topic, and probably even more so as we continue to navigate this environment, the current situation. So again, thanks to Julie and Share for inviting me to be here. I feel extremely honored to actually have a number of what we're calling special guests here today that we're going to speak with, and that I really think of the showcase of kind of the conversation. And for those of you who know me, and you know that this will be really laid back. I would rather this be more conversational, more opportunity for us to, no pun intended, share our experiences here, given that this is the Share Shine, right? So we want to be able to, instead of having me talk the whole time, really conversation about what it is that you all are needing. What are you looking for as far as, you know, what experiences you have specifically around board diversity and diversity in the boardroom. So that said, I will get to our special guests a little bit later, but going back to current state, we'll see if this technology is going to work with me this morning. Let's see. All right. So a little bit again about where we are really looking. So the topic we were talking about today is really around diversity in the boardroom. As a nonprofit, and I'll start using the word partner instead of consultant, because again, those who I've been working with know it's more of a consultancy than, you know, it's more of me walking with the partners. When we talk about from a perspective of the work that I do, and I get to, at the Lee Institute, have purview of a lot of different organizations and what they're dealing with. When we talk about diversity, given the highlight on what was happening in 2020 around lack of connection to community, when there was a need to have emergency service or needed for emergency services, who we leaned on, that was the nonprofit sector. A lot of funding actually came down towards the nonprofit sector to lean in and fill in gaps. And what we recognized is that there is a huge opportunity. I think those of us who have been in this work for a while already knew it was there, but there was much more of a highlight placed on the nonprofit sector. So at least 60% of all national nonprofits serve in what you might heard this term Black, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And that was according to an Annie and Casey report. So nationally, we're looking at about 60, and this particular report is a few years older, and we'll be sending out some documents that you can read afterwards as resources after the session. But it was at that point in time, it was about 60% of all national nonprofits are serving BIPOC communities, right? So at the same time, BoardSource, the Leading with Intent report in 2017 showed that 84% though of boards identify as white. So clearly you then have a gap between how the nonprofit organizations are connecting to those communities when there is a lack of representation. Representation is important. And then we look at our country's growing awareness, particularly over the last year, of inequities causing many to focus on diversity, equity, inclusion. What I find interesting, again, around the conversation that Julie and I had when we came up with this particular topic was, you know, she asked kind of, Crystal, what are you seeing or what are you hearing? I said, there's been a lot of conversation around, we need to diversify our boards. We need to diversify our staff. We need to be able to figure out how to connect more to the communities that we're serving for these nonprofits. And my question was always, and I've heard a couple of you know that I've used the term that I'm a corporate refugee. So on the corporate side, there has for a long time been a department in human resources called diversity and inclusion. It's always this sort of turn of, you know, what are we focusing on now? We're focusing on D&I, and what does that really mean? And what does that look like? And when things were going on nationally or locally, there would be a spin to focus on those particular areas. And then, as I'd say, as things cooled off, it would be a sort of a turn away from, and I'd say the bright shining, whatever was the bright shining was what the focus was on. But right now in our pause, there was an awareness, I believe, that really gives us an opportunity to really stick with, have conversations around what it means to have more diversity. And I say that it's more diversity than inclusion than equity, but nobody wants to use the term DIE because that sounds bad. But it's DEI that we're talking about. So it's diversity, equity, inclusion on these nonprofit boards and in executive leadership. But again, how are we really connecting and making sure that we are looking at trying to find really impactful, sustainable solutions to the challenges that each of our nonprofits has dedicated ourselves to per our mission. So that's the national over kind of the landscape that we're looking at. But locally, we then wanted to find out from the SHARE members who want to respond to this particular, let's get us sort of a touch point on where you are right now. So 21 responses. Out of 21 responses, we saw that 33.3% are in the educational space. We saw 42.9% are in social services and other issues. And then it sort of swings from there. But given, again, what we've seen over the past year, the inequity in education, the lack of access with technology, social service and issues around health and wellness, those types of things, when the communities that are sort of disenfranchise those who have not had as much attention when we consider, again, the communities that our nonprofit sector is serving. We recognize that there is a gap. If there's a leadership, if there's not representation on these nonprofit boards, then there can be a gap in how we're serving our communities. So, board representation. So, according to those who responded to the survey, 52% of you said that your board represents that you don't feel that your board appropriately represents the population that you're serving. 48% is yes, which is great. The question that we'll continue to ask ourselves through this is board representation. Does that mean that when we're talking about diversity, we'll ask you to consider, is diversity enough? Is representation enough? And how are you engaging those individuals on your board? We also recognize, though, that those who did respond to the survey, is diversity a key priority? The response overwhelmingly 100% was yes, which is great to hear, because we want to make sure that it is a priority, but how are you also considering, how are you prioritizing that within your organization? So we'll talk about a little bit about that as well. So we wanted to give you an opportunity a little bit just to break out into some small groups and share with amongst yourselves to be able to, so that you're not just listening to me talk, and wanted to give you all an opportunity to connect. So we're going to break you out into small groups and give you about 10 minutes, and really no pressure here at all. No pressure. It's really just share what your nonprofit organization is doing around board diversity, or considering, because some organizations may not have made the shift yet, but if you're considering doing some things around diversification, what is it that you all are talking about? If you're not talking about it just yet, which is, again, just happens to be a data point. Again, hearing what others are doing is great opportunity, again, to share best practices and share information. So let's break out into small groups. Welcome back, everyone. What I forgot to say before we took off was that hopefully you'd feel comfortable coming back and talking about a few things that you talked about in your small groups. No pressure. What are some things that came up in your small group that you wouldn't mind sharing with regards to some things that groups are doing, or organizations are doing around nonprofit board diversity?
I'll start, I guess. We talked about the importance of having clients, our customers, people that we serve on the board, and that diversity has to be broadly looked at, not merely the traditional look at gender, ethnicity, etc., but also lived experiences, different occupations, different perspectives, because all of that is important to create a full-rounded vision and guidance from your board. And that merely diversity in and of itself is not sufficient, that it has to also include inclusion, that they have to be engaged and their experiences brought out, so that we can get a true picture of the direction that the board wants to see the organization going in, and that as an executive director, you need to guide that vision, and help the board grow in that perspective, changing from, let's say a operational board to a strategic board, because every funder is going to ask those questions. Tell me about your board, and you want to be able to answer the question. I have a board that's diverse and inclusive from the holistic perspective, and so that's some of the things we talked about.
Great, thank you, Pedro.
I just want to throw a theme on top of that Jem and I mentioned in our little breakout about trust and sort of are the underlying reasons for what we need to do, especially considering the folks that we serve, is how do we build trust in the community regardless of what we're doing. And if we don't reflect the folks we serve in some way and have some understanding, it's going to be hard to develop the trust that we need to do our jobs.
And I think one way that we do actually build that trust is from the diversity of individuals on your boards, right? And the diversity comes from that lived experience, like what was just mentioned, right? And once we find that lived experience, that's our gateway to trust. We have to then empower that individual to be able to bring us along, right? And to be able to get us into the communities, to be able to do the things that we really want to do.
That's right, Gemini. That's so important because, you know, if you follow what Stephen Covey said, change happens at the speed of trust.
Yeah.
The other quote I stole recently was from Ted Lasso: "Be curious, not judgmental." So that one's hit home with me lately a lot. So.
You know, Crystal, I think one of the things that we have as leaders or as executive directors, I think we've got to make sure our folks understand the purpose, the mission, and holding folks accountable, and not just really, understanding the value of what that seat brings, that board seat means. And I share with our group that either you are on board or you are BORED. And if you are bored, then maybe you can love us from a distance in another capacity. But I think you're only as good as you hold folks accountable. And I'm not talking about managing out of threat or intimidation. What I'm talking about is, if you really wanted to serve on this board, you got to first serve, and you've got to, meet the goals, setting the goals of the board and holding people accountable to meeting those goals. And if not, then what's our strategies for plan Bs? So purpose is one thing, but we got to make sure it's like these Zoom calls. It's got to be action after it, or you got to get something out of it while you're on the call, or else it's just another meeting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You all are actually taking a lot of nuggets and pieces of what we're going to talk about a little bit later and from the rest of the presentation. So it's very interesting that the conversation progressed to this in just the first breakout. So thank you. I appreciate the conversations are going deeper. It's about your board. It's about your staff. So how do you build trust? If your staff sees that your board is not diverse, then what does that mean? What does that look and feel like? If your clients or your customers see that your, staff or your board is not diverse, what does that mean? What does that look like? How are you connecting? Again, when there are situations, how are you able to really have impact and move the needle? To Gemini's points, how are you able to build trust? So again, and diversity, and we'll talk about this a little bit, and diversity is not just about Black, white. What are the things that you need on your board? Who are the people, who are the voices that you need in order to move things forward? Every board does not need to have the same makeup. It depends on the population that you're serving and who you need to connect with and your mission, right? So looking at what is important, and again, those voices that need to be at the table, and making sure that there's representation, and not just representation in saying that we have those positions filled, but are you opening things up so that those individuals who are now part of the board, we'll talk about, does everybody need to be part of the board, or can there be people that are having conversations and part of committees? Are those individuals heard? So are they at the table and they're just at the table? Are their voices really important and being heard? So thank you for sharing. This is going to be a great conversation. So the next piece of your board survey, again, thanks to those who filled it out. So for those who said yes, that said diversity, was a priority. What are you doing? What are you focused on? So one was, we place a high priority on diversity in our board recruitment process, 52.6%. We have diversity DEI goals in our strategic plan. And then we have, our board is going through or has done plans to go through diversity training. We regularly evaluate our efforts. And then honestly, which is great, again, I appreciate it, that this is not an area that we focused on yet. That's some people are recognizing, wait, we maybe need to be focused on diversity and diversifying our board. We've been talking about it, but we haven't done it yet. So that we've seen a lot of that in reporting that has said that there is a need to diversify, but there is some frustration from particularly executive directors and executive leaders that your board needs to diversify, but hasn't actually done that yet. So again, thank you for those who filled this out. But again, we're placing a high priority on diversity goals, but how are you measuring that? What does that look like? How is that really tied to or ingrained in your organization, and how are you doing that? So that's important. The other piece is what obstacles to diversity has your board encountered? So interesting, lack of connection to qualified candidates is 64.7%. I want to dig into that a little bit later with our conversation, and we'll have we'll have Harold Rice, who I think is going to join us a little bit later, talk about kind of what he did and how he's leaned into the connection to qualified candidates, and ask some of our special guests their thoughts on that piece. And then another person, our board is not actively focused on diverse recruiting, again at 11.8%. So lack of qualified candidates, and you're not actively recruiting. So lack of qualified candidates, the question will be, where are you looking? Where are you looking for candidates that can be a part of your board? Is there a lack of qualified candidates, or is there perception given, again, your purview and those that you're connected to? So as we move into the next piece, which I know I feel like I might be rushing, but I really want to get to the panel piece of the discussion. But just some considerations, again, from a perspective of, the lay of the land. When your organization starts talking about diversity and inclusion, and we need to be diversifying our board, my job here is not to really talk about the importance of, hey, you should be diversifying your board because XYZ. Your organization has to identify that for themselves. So those, again, who I work with closely know that one of the first questions I ask, what is your organization's why? Why is it that you are wanting to focus on diversity and inclusion? Why is it that you're wanting to do that now? Has something happened? Oftentimes it's a reaction to something that's happened, but we'll take that momentum however we can get it. But if there is a reaction to, what is it that your organization is dealing with? What's in your organization's ground? Why is there a diversity issue? Again, thinking about and sitting with and having some difficult conversations about what your why is before you begin to go out and recruit people to your board. Thinking about what the organization itself looks and feels like, what's the makeup, but having those conversations first. What does diversity look like now? Really assessing the organization and not just the board. That goes to an assessment of who's the population that you serve, your target population. Who are those individuals? Does your staff reflect those individuals? Does your board also reflect those individuals? Look at the demographics against the community. What voices are missing from the table that are critical to making greater impact in your target community? So it's not just about saying, hey, we're an all white board and we need more, people of color or more Black people. If you're an organization that serves a high Latinx community, does it make sense for you to be pulling in, Black individuals? Do you need Latinx representation? Do you need more male voices at the table? Because oftentimes we hear that it's diverse because, we have a large women, a board that's mainly women or women in leadership. What male voices are you missing at the table so that they can go the other way as well? What voices are not at the table that should be? Do the people of color serving on your board feel comfortable? This is something that, again, considering when you're talking about bringing individuals onto the board, when you bring those individuals on, how are they treated at the table? How are their voices heard? Are they included? So there is a difference between diversity and that seat at the table and inclusion. And then that's why I said I talk about diversity first before we get to inclusion. And that's way before you even get to the conversation around equity. Because if you can't get to you, it's a stair step. So how are those people feeling? If you have people of color on your board, do they feel comfortable? Are they the only ones? You know, how are they? So again, really taking a hard look at what your current makeup looks like and how the people are feeling that are currently a part of your organization. And then what could be done differently to be more inclusive and welcoming? So finding ways to really delve into it in a way that you are being sincere and asking and looking for ways to make change, if that is the direction that you're moving in. Again, these are some tough questions. It's not a one conversation. It's not something that you can determine in an hour, but you have to be much more intentional about how you're really diving into your organization. Then looking at what is the vision for what DEI should look like for your organization. This becomes even larger conversation because it needs to be aligned with the vision. If one or two board members feel like we should be focused on diversity and the rest of the board does not, you really need to make sure that everybody's on board, because again, how people feel when you come onto the board, how you are assessing your success and how your people, what those relationships look and feel like on your board are important. So there needs to be alignment around what that needs to look like. Why is this important to us right now? What does it need to look like, and how we're going to hold ourselves accountable for moving this forward? And then what's the plan? So once you've determined, hey, we know what our why is, we understand that it's important, this is what we're going to do. And now you create your goals, your strategies for diversity inclusion. And then you tie that to your plan so that you're making sure you're keeping, and again, that has to be for whatever your organization is, and you all determine what that looks like. So determine measures that are qualitative and not just quantitative. So it can't just be about we've added 3, women to the board, or we brought in, 2 additional folks from the LGBTQ, community. It can't be just about numbers. How are those individuals engaging in your organization? What does that feel like? Are they active? Are they feeling included? Are their voices being heard? Have there been changes in the organization and the field? How are your clients feeling about that? But again, determining how you're going to measure your success and what that needs to look like for your organization. All right, questions? Anything? Because otherwise we're going to the good stuff.
There's a question that's sitting out there about who decides who's qualified.
Yes, I don't want that to be I want that to be a question. I want us to be a part of the discussion, because that, I think that would be a really interesting discussion for us to have. So let's plan on doing that. I always go where the conversation needs to go. So thank you again so much to everybody for being here. We're going to shift into really like I said, the meat of what I'm hoping this session would be about, is really to talk through some things, have some organizations who are doing some of this work, have an opportunity to share their process, what's going well, what there might be challenges with, and for us to then open up a conversation with the additional folks that are here today. So today we've got from Caring, and I'll let them introduce themselves, but we have Morgan Hinton and Dean Sickens from, they're both board members. And Dean, if I butchered your last name, please correct me.
It's happening with Sickens. No big deal. It happens all the time.
Sickens. That's what I said. I was tipped not to do it.
Yep.
But I've been working with them. They are great and they're on this DEI journey. So I would love for them to be able to talk about that. From Center for Community Transitions, we have Patrice Funderburg, who's Executive Director, I'm sure a number of you know. Mark Jamsevich. Where'd Mark go?
Close enough. Jarbosi.
Well, we've got Mark and Gemini. I'm just going to start saying everybody's first name so I don't butcher anybody else's. So we have them from Center for Community Transitions, who again doing great work and really are working to focus on how lived experience shows up for their board and the transition that they're making with their new leadership as well. So both Caring and Center for Community Transitions have new executive directors. We have Sam Smith, who I'm sure all of you are familiar with from United Way, wanted to have his perspective from a funder, talk about what they're doing and what he's seeing from his lens. And then I think if he's not on yet, Harold Jr., who's CEO with Ada Jenkins Center and who is founder of Black Social Capital Initiative, have a new nonprofit focused on providing a pipeline of leaders ready to serve in both executive leadership roles, but and that could be as executive directors for nonprofit organizations, but also board roles, because he was in a session where he heard the same thing around lack of qualified candidates. So again, we'll be able to have that conversation a little bit later. But thank you to all of our special guests who are here with us. I want to start off with Caring and have an opportunity for Caring, the folks at Caring, to talk about your organization and how you started down this DEI journey and what that looks like for you.
Thanks, Crystal. Yeah, Dean, I'll kick it off. I don't know if I can share anything that we don't all already know or haven't already said so early in this workshop, which is great. Dean and I met yesterday and we tried to come up with a few notes to get ready for today. So I'm just going to share, a little bit about what we have going on in our measures. And I'm not a DE&I expert. Luckily, like Crystal mentioned, we have her to guide us through, this journey at Caring. And we're so happy for you and thankful for you, Crystal, and for meeting with us earlier this week while you're on vacation. So good to see you again. So I think at Caring, we really have an authentic and genuine interest in weaving DE&I into the DNA of Caring, and not just for a moment. And I'm sure several of you all mentioned that probably in your breakout rooms like I did, but this is a long-lasting, forever thing. And I think for us at Caring, that's evident through our equity committee, which is fairly new. And we get to mix, myself and Dean, who are board members, with staff. And it's been a great opportunity to hear from them. And one that we might not have been able to hear from before, because for me, I don't really get to interact with the staff as much. And the board as a general and as a whole is not always the first stop for community. When I look at a website or a company, nonprofit, I have to go out and find their board, on their website. So leadership, diversity and leadership, your E-team, that's also important. So our new ED put us through our board composition matrix at the end of the year. And that really gave us a chance to kind of look at ourselves in the mirror and, see what we have going on. So, and from that, we were able to move with intention. And we have now several new board members, about 5, who all represent a variety of diverse backgrounds as well as lived experience. And that's really, really important for us. So I think, and also because we're serving a majority of people of color, we feel that it's very important that our board reflects the people who we're caring for.
Absolutely. And so Morgan's newer than I've been on the Caring board for 6 years. And I think, like I said, most people probably have heard of us at some level, but we provide care for the under and uninsured with significant support from our local community healthcare providers, Atrium and Avant and others. And so in the 6 years I've been on the board, I guess I can say I'm slightly embarrassed that it took a few years before I looked in the mirror and went, yeah, we're not really diverse enough. And it kind of hit like a brick. And initially, as a board, we all sort of just agreed we need to look for, when there's openings, we need to look for diverse candidates. We hadn't necessarily put a science behind it at first. I met Morgan at a volunteer event and hit it off. And, here's someone who grew up in Charlotte, has a diverse background, was in the healthcare industry like myself. I thought, all right, I need to invite her out to meet the rest of the folks. And it was sort of, being aware and looking for people in that sort of connected environment. But with Don, and then, creating the diversity and inclusion committee that we started last year, and then Shanavia as our new executive director, putting even more sort of rigor around, the measurements and defining what diversity is beyond, color and all the other things, whether it's life experience, your professional experience, all those things. It's been fantastic. And then now working with Crystal, what I've really seen is that whole connection to the staff. I mean, like I said, I've been on the board 6 years, but I didn't know a lot of that. Didn't understand our staff is mostly diverse as well. And just the eye-opening comments in our group that we have that's just sharing together to build trust has been completely amazing for me to hear, and given me a whole new perspective on what diversity means, and how that trust with the board and giving people, or with the staff, I mean, is a huge part of that. And then adding on the staff, the board member who's a former client of ours, and getting that perspective now is going to be even better. And I'm really excited about the commitment we've made to it. And again, it's not an event. It's a journey, not an event, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We're going to be in this for the long haul.
Yeah, the lived experience board member is a graduate of our Nurse Family Partnership program. So she can speak directly to mothers, young and old, who are going through that program, which is great. And Dean and I were also on the executive search committee together, which was a diverse makeup from our board. And we kept, DE&I conversations at the forefront going through that process, because we knew that was going to be important for us moving into this next chapter with Caring. So we're really proud of, being able to operate with intention at Caring.
Absolutely.
Question, Dean, did you you said you helped to recruit Morgan to the board?
I did. Yes.
What was that process like? So I'll ask. So what did that process look like? So we're talking about diversity or recruitment to the board. What did that process look like, and how did that feel for you, Morgan, too?
So we didn't have a real formal. It's funny. I mean, one of the main reasons I even joined the board is because I'm somewhat of a networker, and I'm in the healthcare industry. And so before Morgan, I recruited people that knew healthcare from Atrium or other places to get involved, because I thought it would be good to have people in the healthcare industry from the bigger, from large health systems to help our board. But then the diversity concept started coming up, and we were older, we were whiter. I'm like, okay, we need to really rethink this. And I mean, before COVID, I did a lot more stuff out in the world. So a lot of volunteer events, a lot of community engagement. I'm on the board of a healthcare leadership professional group as well. So recruited people from there to just be involved. And I mean, I met Morgan and said, hey, we've been talking about this. We have other folks we're talking to, but she's perfect, because not only she grew up here in town, but she has that diverse experience. She knows a lot of the history of the city and the things that have gone on from her family experience. And so that was really something unique. Many of us aren't from Charlotte who are on the board initially, because obviously we have a lot of folks that aren't from Charlotte. And so it was many things. And I just invited her to an event, introduced her to several people on the executive committee and on the board, and they did the interviewing, and we're like, yep, that was an easy decision. So.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't remember don't know if I remember how the conversation exactly came up. We were sorting clothes at Crisis Assistance Men volunteering one day. I think I may have mentioned Greer Heights, and my mom is on here. She grew up in Greer Heights, and Caring does a lot of work in the community. And I think that's what got the conversation started, and it really went from there. It was a little bit more informal, but I did have, several meetings with a few people from the governance team, and it was a smooth process. Everyone was welcoming. It wasn't, super astringent, which I appreciate, because I'm learning a lot from them. There are a lot of professionals on the board. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I have enough experience to really hang with these people, but everyone was so welcoming, really listens to different perspectives. So it's been great.
Thanks for you, to you both for sharing. You also, I promise I won't hog all the time a little, and I'll open it up for questions in just a little bit, but I want to move on. Thank you, Dean and Morgan.
Thank
Center
you.
for Community Transitions. So we have Patrice and I think Gemini, I saw Gemini and Mark. I've been working with them. Can you talk about what your organization does first to highlight CCT, and then talk about what you all are doing in this D&I space as well?
Yeah, thanks again for having us. Hey, everyone, again, it's Patrice. I am the executive director at Center for Community Transition and also a former board member of the organization. We are an almost 50-year-old nonprofit that works with people and families that have been impacted by incarceration. And over the past couple of years, we as an agency and both as a sector in our economic mobility conversations have really amplified the role of criminal justice, particularly as a factor in economic mobility. So we work with, we have an employment readiness program where we work with individuals who are justice involved on finding and keeping employment. We have a children and families program where we work with children of incarcerated parents inside of CMS schools. And then I'm actually a prison warden. And I say that sort of facetiously. We have a contract with the state of North Carolina where I run a 24/7 residential work release dorm for women who are preparing to be released from state prison sentence. They live at our facility from 12 to 36 months before the end of their prison sentence. I became familiar with the organization back in 2016 when I emancipated from a long career in corporate human resources. And so my knowledge, awareness, and experience with boards was really on publicly traded company boards, dealing with, how to engage our board members in some of our operational initiatives. And I brought that to the agency when I was recruited to the board by the former executive director in 2017. At the time, I think I was the only person with human resources experience, but I also had been working in the community, just trying to figure out what I didn't know about working in philanthropy and nonprofit, specifically in the Charlotte community. Around the time when I met Gemini, who I'm going to turn it over to Gemini and Mark in a minute. And so the lived experience was really a driver of me, both personally, because I represent the 1 in 4 people who have a sibling impacted by incarceration. And having worked in Charlotte for over 10 years in the corporate sector, it wasn't until 2016 that I really got to know the Charlotte community from the perspective of people who have lived experiences. And I worked in corporate diversity for major companies here and was just never connected to that work. So the intersection of my HR experience and building relationships inside of the community, working alongside folks that have lived experience, became critical for me. Fast forward to what I didn't know was happening in 2017 was the then executive director was sort of succession planning. And in 2018 began conversations around, hey, would you ever consider, taking over for me when I retire? And I eventually said yes and became executive director in January of 2020. I want to share with you the values that I introduced to the organization when I came, not because they didn't exist, but they existed in a way that wasn't bold and declarative. And our values today include equity, second chances, lived experience, courage, respect, and community. And the work that the board that we have now have been doing is around not only operationalizing those, but to Gemini's earlier point, what does it mean and what does it look like and what does it feel like to move at the speed of trust, and centering lived experience? There's something that has been that folks with experience of incarceration often say, nothing about us without us is for us, which is adapted from the disability movement, but it's very relevant in the criminal justice movement because what we see happening at the community and even at the neighborhood level is that a lot of the focus around criminal justice it centers lived experience, but the people with lived experience are not at the center of that centering. And that has been a really a priority focus from an operational standpoint for me as the leader of the organization. And going forward, and I'll turn it over to Mark and Gemini to talk a little bit more about this, what specific things that we've been doing on our board to ensure that, that does remain bold and declarative part of not only what we say we're doing, but how we're doing and how we live that out in the community every day.
Feel free to go, Mark. You can go ahead and I'll follow you.
Thanks, Gemini. Patrice, thank you. I'll share kind of my very personal story as it relates to this board. I don't even know if I've ever shared this with Patrice, but I joined the board in 2017 because I really wanted to get engaged in this area and do more. Honestly, the board composition was disappointingly undiverse. And after my first year and a half, I'll be honest, the board makeup was actually, and culture was pretty toxic. There wasn't a lot of trust. There wasn't a lot of collaboration. And I had considered resigning my post on the board because of that. But because of working with Patrice, seeing her come into the board leadership role, I agreed to, rather than leaving the board, take on the chair of the board role. And I felt really good doing that because of Patrice's leadership, because we had recruited some new folks onto the board, but because I saw what we could do and how we could change things through our change in focus for the team, as well as our board composition. The two things that we've focused on as we've done that have been first the diversity of background amongst the board to best support the needs of the organization. So I think similar to what Dean and Morgan said, looking at our board needs matrix, understanding we have a wide diversity of programs and stakeholders at the end of our work, making sure we have folks who are familiar with the systems, familiar with the state, familiar with the needs of kids, familiar with the needs of those who were recently released, et cetera, to make sure that we could support the staff and the executive director with our own expertise. The second piece, and we talk about who's qualified to be on the board. It starts with that background, but the second part is really making sure that they share the values that Patrice mentioned, so that we can all be on the same page, so that we can all come to our board meetings and our board work together, sharing the vision, sharing the value of equity and second chances and courage and respect, so that all the voices around the table can be heard and ultimately contribute more to the success of our organization. Gemini.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Well, for me, when I actually think about a lot of stuff that was being said, and you want to know what diversity looks like on a board, you look at me being on the board at CCT, which says to a community that Gemini is on that board right there. So I trust what CCT is doing. See, when you become a reflection of what you're trying to create for community, and you have people involved, because the people who are closer to the problem are closer to the solutions. I'm formerly incarcerated individual who served 20 years in federal prison. Never would I have thought to be able to be on certain boards like Green Light Fund and CCT, and to be able to have my own organization and things of that nature. But when we continue to talk about how we can be a reflection of what we want to achieve, we have to have that diversity on our boards. We have to have someone like a Gemini on the board to say to community, we are here for you. Look at what we're doing. Look at who we're bringing along. Because now CCT, along with myself, can go to these communities, and these communities will trust us now, because I'm a reflection of where they are, where they come from. So I can go in with the conversations to be able to bridge that gap that may be missing from what CCT is trying to do to get involved in communities. Because we're dealing with individuals who are coming home from being incarcerated, and we're trying to help transition them off into a community once again. So you have to have someone, or you have to have someone that's a reflection of what you want to be on your board. That's where the diversity come in for me at, because I'm just grateful and thankful that I met Patrice. Patrice has really, really been a dear, she's like my sister. She's my little big sister. She like to say she big sis, but I say she little big sister. But I'm very proud to have met her, because Patrice has really been, she has been on this diversity thing since I met her. And we have always talked about taking the pyramid and turning it upside down and flipping the pyramid, right? And flipping the pyramid of power and empowering the individuals that have these lived experiences. Don't silence their voice. Let their voices be loud and heard. And that's what I'm so grateful and proud of, to be a part of this organization with CCT, and to be able to sit at the table of a board that is diverse enough that I can still learn so much stuff from each individual that is on the board. So I'm just thankful to be here. And I would encourage anyone that's with an organization, if it's in the criminal justice field, that you're trying to help individuals, or it's just you helping the marginalized communities, right? I would really encourage individuals to have lived experience on those boards, especially when it comes to mass incarceration and things of that nature, because my voice had been silenced for so long. For 20 years, I was just on a slab, right? And then I come home, and now I'm a part of trying to help build our communities back up. And I'm so solely focused on this trust campaign that I'm creating. So that's where I'm at with it. And I'm just grateful and thankful. And I encourage people to be a part of, to do their part in empowering the individuals that need or that have that lived experience.
Okay. What they're willing to settle is about to.
Yeah, I think if I could, Crystal. Oh,
absolutely, absolutely.
No, I was just going to comment on a couple things that both Mark and Gemini said, because I think the intersection of their comments and the work that we do at CCT is really reflective of what we as a Charlotte community, both from my corporate days and even in the nonprofit space, say we want. And there are gaps, I believe, from my experience and just observation on the how. Gemini and I met at a re-entry rally in late 2017 that was at Marshall Park. He, along with a few other directly impacted folks, many of you may be familiar with Christy Puckett Williams. She organized that event, and it was not long before that I met her as well, and several others, and he and I met. And I remember very explicitly Gemini asking me a question not long after that event, like, yo, why are you doing this? Like, you a corporate person, why do you do this? And it was one of the first times that I really had an opportunity to process out loud with someone what was happening for me, when it hit me that, like, hey, I am not a person with lived experience, but I have this direct experience in my own family that I've never talked about. And it was also an introduction to how could I have been a diversity and inclusion practitioner, HR practitioner, person who worked for a Fortune 10 company in Charlotte for a long period of time, and not be rooted in the actual community. And to your point, Dean, I'm also not from Charlotte, but I've been all the events, chamber annual meeting, all the things, but not connected to the community. And so it really became personal for me to like, yo, I want to hang with folks that are doing this criminal justice work, because that wasn't a part of the work that any of the corporate entities that I was involved in at the time were invested in. And so I was just curious, and my curiosity led me down a path to, you know, very familiar relationships with Gemini and others that are native Charlotteans, that have long histories of experience, and that have been leaders in their communities for a number of years. That was just something that didn't exist on the corporate side. To Mark's point, when he and I joined the board in 2017, the culture of the board was very traditional, philanthropic. Hey, there's this underserved population. We're a bunch of wealthy folks with titles in corporate spaces, and we want to do our part to infuse, you know, awareness and all the things to, you know, make sure that these kids who have parents or caregivers that are incarcerated do well, right? It was the educational equity conversation, but there was very much a disconnect to actual relationships with people, whether they were clients of CCT or otherwise. And I very much appreciate Mark's candor in just naming what toxicity looks like on a board, and his decision process and the why he chose to stay. Those intersections of Gemini being native Charlottean, his experience, not only as a justice involved person, but as a leader in the community with Project Bolt and some of the other things that he's involved in. And what Mark and I have in common is, you know, corporate experience at dealing with executives of Fortune 20 and 10 companies, et cetera, and creating an environment on a board where all of that can exist in the same place, right? Oftentimes, you know, we have these corporate rubrics on how we should behave. And I always say the 6 bullets on a slide of what you need to do, and those things are necessary, but so are the bobbing and weaving and adapting and pivoting of figuring it out together. And while we're quoting folks, there's an organizer, a Detroit-based organizer, shout out to Detroit, Mark. There's an organizer who named Grace Lee Boggs, who talks about being responsible for the change that we want to see in the world. And if we can't see ourselves in that change, then it is our duty to create systems and structures on seeing ourselves. What does it mean for me to exist in this space? How do I enter and exit a space? And that's community organizing 101 meets corporate rubric and outlines in diversity structuring and consultancy. And what we're doing at CCT is, in a very unique and customized way, in order to serve our clients, is marrying those two things. And it isn't always pretty. I love seeing my board interact with each other. Like, they all actually like each other now and have all kinds of conversations. And it really just wasn't like that. It didn't mean that prior board members were not engaged, but they were engaged for very different reasons. And I do believe that it was that pyramid structure. I have a title, I have power, I have wealth. And so I get to decide how things will happen. And Gemini's point around that upside down triangle is not that the upside down triangle is the solution, but the process of turning that triangle upside down is how we get closer to the solutions. And as the operational leader and a community leader, I would say, you know, my position of being bold and declarative in that way is the way that we transform and change the narrative about people who have been justice involved. And I'm proud to have the board that we have and the work that we're doing and the support that we have from Crystal.
And Patrice, actually, you were going where I was going. So that was perfect. Actually, that was perfect. So I have little to say on that, except that what I'm hearing from both organizations so far is that, one, it's been the evolution of the board. So I like to say it that way. So when people are like, oh, well, you no, it's been the evolution of the board to really start to align with what their mission is and how they're executing against that. And then in order to do that, what their makeup and their organizational structure needs to look like so that they have true proximity to the mission and the people that they are trying to serve. So that's one. And what you've also, I think, heard from all the board members is that there is real passion for the work, that they are involved and engaged and interested in this particular work and connecting and having impact. So it's not just about finding individuals who check a box. You're actually finding people who are engaged and want to be a part of this and who are actively involved. So the people that we've heard from so far have been actively involved in this work that they are doing. So kudos again, and hopefully you all are getting some really good nuggets from this conversation. Next, sir, Mr. Smith, would love to hear from you, from a funder perspective, what you're seeing maybe in, is there a shift for how funders are looking at diversity? What does that look like from your lens and just your experience in general?
Awesome. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Cher, for putting this together. I do have a disclaimer. I am home today, so if you hear the kids in the background, just act like you don't hear them, because that's what I'm going to do as I'm speaking. So Sam Smith, I'm with the United Way of Central Carolinas, and I'm going to kind of give a couple spins and perspective on how we are approaching this diversity space as an organization. First and foremost, the United Way, if you're familiar with the United Way, and I said this in our small breakout group, traditionally, this is your grandfather organization. So your traditional United Way is all white men with gray hair. And that's what United Way has been for a very, very long time. Over the last several years, we've been very intentional in trying to change that paradigm, trying to make sure that those who serve on our United Way boards are people who are representation of our community. One of the things that we have done as an agency is really just taking a step back. We know that the next workforce in this country is going to be millennials, and they are going to be the decision makers, and they are going to be the ones with the pens to write the check. So one of the things that we've been doing as an agency from a high-level board perspective is making sure that we are preparing but also recruiting millennials to potentially serve on the United Way board. We've also been intentional around the space of putting people with lived experience on our board, because how can we be in a community speaking the language about diversity, equity, and through a racial equity lens when we're not representing that on our board? So from a broad perspective from the United Way, that's what we're doing at the board level. We've also, over the last month or so, has transitioned, shift some positions around. So now we have a person within our team that has been in this diversity space for many years, pretty much her whole career prior to coming to the United Way. Now she has went back into the diversity space. So now we have a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The whole goal is to not only internally see how we can diversify our organization, but the agencies that we work with, how do we provide content for agencies in the community to look at what they are doing from a diverse, equity, and inclusion perspective. Many of you may have participated in this last year. This is that was our first time doing something at this level. And I think we're going to do it again with some enhanced programming. Last year we hosted we did an equity 21-day equity challenge. We had over 15,000 people from across this region. We had people from other states who participated in the equity challenge. It was 21 days, and we really dig deep into the systematic issues that are happening in our community, looking at it from a direct service perspective, but also for some of those who participated from a funder perspective. Some of those who participated were funders. So this year, because it was so successful, and we have 15,000 people who really wanted to lean in on that 21-day equity challenge, this year we're looking to expand that. And our goal is to put together these small equity challenge that organizations can do within their organization to really dig into their organization equity challenges. So that's what we're doing, again, from a more high level, broader perspective. From a funder perspective, we're starting to hold our grantees, as we call them, or our partners, responsible to make sure that the work that they're doing and everyone that serves on their board is a representation of what they're doing. And I will speak specifically to the fund that I manage. So as you know, United Way, we are not a your traditional United Way. Our primary goal as an agency is that we go and raise money. We do not do any direct services. We fund and support organizations that are doing the direct services. So we have three ways that we do that. We have one is our impact grant. That's our more traditional grandfathered in organization. We have our United Neighborhoods, where we have specifically targeted 2 communities. And we'll be adding the third one this year. And more information will come out soon on that. But we're specifically targeted 2 disinvested communities, Great Heights and Renaissance West. And we'll really allow the community to help and drive the revitalization work that's needed in those communities. And then the third way that we fund, which is the one that I manage, and I'm sorry, that's my son in the background playing with the curtains. The third way that we fund, which is the one that I manage, is our Unite Charlotte Fund. So looking at it from a diversity, equity perspective. So the Unite Charlotte Fund was started in 2016 after the Keith Lamont Scott shooting. Part of the reason why the fund was started is because a lot of our leaders realized that we've been funding a lot of these agencies for over 80, 100 years that the United Way of Central Carolina has been around. But we still have the same systematic issues and barriers in the community. And Keith Lamont Scott shooting really opened our eyes to the grassroots efforts that are being done in this community that otherwise wasn't being looked at. So for several years, we funded the same agencies at different levels, but we funded the same agencies. But what we were doing, and unintentionally doing it, was creating the same systematic barrier that we said we wanted Unite Charlotte to do, which was break down and create access for capital for grassroots organizations. So over the last 2 years, we have really went into this deep dive and this deep rebranding of deep dive and deep rebranding of how we administer our Unite Charlotte Fund. And one of the things that we have done as an agency is, from a racial equity perspective, is that if you are looking to get funded through our Unite Charlotte program, your organization has to be led by a person of color. If your organization is not led by a person of color, your board has to represent the community that you say you're going to serve. And that's a requirement. That's actually a pre-qualifier for our 2022 funding. Our board, our big board, has came around and said, this is what we need to do to be more intentional if we're trying to look at how we fund the community from a racial equity lens. So any organization that's interested in funding through our Unite Charlotte program, if your board doesn't represent the community that you're serving, or your executive director is not that of a person of color or BIPOC, we are definitely not interested in supporting you or funding the work that you're doing, because we have to start being bold and have to start putting more intentionality behind this work. So from a racial equity perspective, that's where we are. The last piece I'll add to that Unite Charlotte piece that we have been very intentional on is that even though we are asking our community, if you're going to seek funding from us, everything you do has to be done through an economic mobility lens. But the most important piece that we are asking across all of our funding is that even if you're doing the work around the economic mobility lens, you have to look at it through a racial equity lens. So we don't care what you're doing, but if you don't have that racial equity spin to it, again, we're not interested in funding the work that you're doing. Now, United Way doesn't make the decision. So the organizations submit their application. We have convened a diverse group of community members, lived experiences, elected officials, clergy. We've convened a group of community leaders who are actually the ones who make the decision on what organization should be funded and what that looks like. And we were very intentional about it because traditionally, 50 years ago, it was all white men making decisions for things in our community that it had no connection to. So how do we support organizations where we don't have people on the board that represent those communities that they're serving? So that's the work that we are doing from a racial equity perspective here at the United Way.
Thanks, Sam. Question. So I'm gonna dig a little bit deeper just because this is what I do. What's the feedback been? What feedback have you heard around the shift that you've made to focus, that the organization has made to focus then more heavily on accountability for DEI or racial equity lens?
For the most part, it has been very positive. We have this thing called the Funder Collaborative. This is where a lot of the organizations that we fund, we convene them. And within the Funder Collaborative, we're working with Tracy Washington. Most of you may know Tracy. We're working with her, and we are really leaning into this diversity, this equity, this racial equity lens. So that group has been very positive. But if I could just take a second to share a story now that you asked what the feedback has been. So I mentioned our 2022 funding. We're very intentional. The organization, we have 3 qualifying questions. Is the organization led by a person of color? Is your annual revenue under a certain amount? And I can't think what the third one is, but it's 3 questions that we're asking. So we opened our grant cycle in last 2 weeks ago on Monday, August 2nd. We opened our grant cycle. And part of opening our grant cycle, again, if you go apply, you have these requirements in our information packet. You have these requirements that you have to abide to. I had a young lady. I've had several people that have called, but this one really resonated with me. I had a young lady who called me. This may have been last Thursday, Friday. A white lady who started a nonprofit, and she curiously wanted to know why that the Unite Charlotte Fund is only specifically targeted to organizations that are led by people of color. And I explained that to her. I explained the research to her. I'm not sure if most of you guys know right now is Black Philanthropy Month, so NGAP is working on this bold research that's going to really blow a lot of our minds back when that research come out about the importance of funding Black and brown-led organizations. But there was an organization called Echoing Green last year that did a research study, and part of their research study, they found that there's a $20 million gap between white-led organizations and organizations that are led by people of color. $20 million, and I'm just talking grassroots. We're not talking about the big funding, the big traditional organizations. So right there, it tells us we have a huge systematic racial problem. So when she called me, she said, yeah, why is Unite Charlotte only open to Black or brown people? She said, now, as a white woman, I feel discriminated against. I feel like you guys are discriminated against me because of my skin, because of my color, because of how I was born. I didn't choose to be born this way. And I feel that the United Way is perpetrating the same systematic issue that you guys say that you want to break. You're eliminating white people from the process. And I had to explain to her, one, about, I always push people to the data. I try to explain to her, if you go read the data, if you go read any report out there, when you're looking from a racial equity lens and funders and things like that, there's a big disparity in white-led organization and Black-led organization. I also try to explain to her that as a white woman, she can go and get funding. She can apply for funding, she can pull her demographic, and her chances of getting funded is up here compared to that same, it could be the exact same program, exact same funding level for a Black person. That funding level is right here. But before we got off the call, she made sure that I understood that as a white woman, that she felt like she was discriminated against. She didn't feel like it was right. She didn't feel like the system was fair. Her program and what she does to support Black and brown people, and we should fund her because her program support Black and brown people. So I just want to just put that out there in the space that Even though we get a lot of positive reviews and a lot of people saying kudos to the United Way for being intentional, being bold, and doing what's right, we still have that subset of people who feel like no matter what we do, they're still going to be discriminated against, even though their access is better than that of a person of color. Sorry, Chris, that was a long way to answer your question, but I just wanted to just put that out there.
That was perfect, because I wondered if there had been that type of feedback. So that was what I was looking for. So again, understanding the access and the data and pointing back to the information around the data, I think is extremely important. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it, Sam. All right, last but not least, and again, as Julie mentioned, we'll start opening it up, and feel free to put a question in the chat, and we can make sure we get to you. And we'll come back to this qualified question. We won't forget about that. But last but not least, Harold Rice has joined the call. Welcome, Harold. Would love for what we're talking about is just an introduction of the organization. So Harold is the founder of Black Social Capital Initiative. And without stealing his thunder, I wanted you to just be able to talk about what BSI is and how you came to decide to initiate this organization and this program. And then again, when we were talking about board diversity, that pipeline and creating that pipeline of qualified candidates, and I'll we'll talk about the qualified people piece a little bit later. But Harold, go ahead.
Great, thanks for having me, Chair Charlotte, and glad to see everyone here today. Harold Rice, I will say I'm also the CEO of the Ada Jenkins Center in Davidson. So if you see my face there, yep, I'm the CEO there as well. How I got started on this work, in 2017, I was at a Rotary meeting, and Sean Garrett was the CEO of United Way, and he was talking at the luncheon, and he said, Charlotte, obviously this is on his way out, so you get to say what you want when you're on your way out. He said, Charlotte, you guys have a problem, a real problem with minority leadership in the nonprofit space. And it was like a mic drop moment for me. And just subsequently, a few weeks later, I was in Raleigh at a succession planning workshop with board chairs, CEOs, and the like. And there was a segment where they talked about minority leadership or the lack thereof. And they said the reason there was a lack of minority leadership was with three things. One, Blacks specifically lacked the skills and talent to lead. Two, were just uninterested. And then three, we lacked the social capital. And then they turned around and said, what do you think? And then that's when I realized I was the only fly in the buttermilk. And I said, I'm pissed as hell, because I know a lot of people that are qualified and ready to lead. And so, I bothered my wife for weeks and weeks. And she said, I'm tired of you talking to me about it. Do something about it. So I started having conversations with anybody that would listen. Sean transitioned. I went over to United Way and knocked on Laura's door. And she agreed. She said, one thing she said is, I said, I know search firms come around. She said, yeah, they do. And we know different ones, but there is no pipeline, if you will, of next level leaders that look like you. And so, what I thought was, well, perhaps, we create something that was complementary to other professional development workshops, such as the Lee Institute or Leadership Charlotte, but something that was particular to Black people or people of color. And so, because leadership, what we know and what I know now, leadership looks different for us. It doesn't look the same. And so we were able to shout out to United Way for giving us some funding to put together a cohort of next level leaders. These are people who are ready to lead, ready to go. They are already in the nonprofit space. That's another thing. A lot of nonprofit babies such as myself, it's hard for us to move up to get that seat. Oftentimes, the board chairs, and we talked about this, the boardroom looks really white. And so when the CEO makes an announcement about a retirement, or if someone is leaving, the board reaches out to their network. And that's how you get a lot more people that are not from the nonprofit space, one, but also that look like them, leading organizations that are impacting more people of color. And so, you know, with this group, we wanted to make sure that we had workshops that cater to us, such as what impacts my ability to lead. When I go to funders, how does my color impact philanthropy? Outside of the Urban League, if I go to a funder and if I hire a Black development officer, I wonder if a funder sees us as a Black organization or an organization that just has a cause. So these questions come out, and it could impact my decision to hire or not hire a Black development officer based upon the money that I will receive. And we don't even realize those things. It was also important to us not to just have workshops that went along with the participants specifically for Black leaders, but to also pair them with current leaders that are Black people of color that can help guide them through the role of leadership or even getting to CEO. And so, you know, we were able to pull together a group of current leaders who are leading organizations, strong leaders, such as Chris Jackson, Matt McDonald, Donna Dewberry, Tawana Dewberry, Donna Dunlap, and others, to help mentor these participants as they go through the cohort, to help even more so prepare them for their seat when they get there. And to also talk to search firms and other board chairs to build up the pipeline to say, hey, when there's a role that opens up, you need to seek us out, because we have people that are ready to go, that are ready to lead and have had these opportunities. Again, it's complementary. It doesn't mean that they can't go to other professional development workshops, but none of those workshops that I went through and attended, while they were all great, it didn't talk about what leadership would look like for me when it was my turn. So this is what that is about. Our intended outcomes is that, you know, we have a keen understanding of what leadership looks like for us. Also taking advantage of other boards and civic engagement projects. It's important for us to make sure that we have people being a part of the boards, right? Being a part of committees. And hopefully at some point, you know, we can see an increased opportunity for CEOs in the seats of nonprofits in which we serve the majority of people of color. And again, it's something that had passionately resonated with me. I didn't know that I was going to have to be the ED for it for a while, but it is what it is. We want to make sure that we have a viable pipeline. We are preparing people for when leadership comes up, that, you know, they understand that perhaps their parachute may not open as wide as someone else's. And so those conversations, real intimate conversations, are happening in these cohorts. And so we're excited about finishing up cohort 1 next month, and we're already booked up for cohort 2. Because again, it's not to take away from any other complementary professional development program, but there is no professional development program where you can really talk about what leadership will look like for you when it's your turn. And I will add that, and I think Pedro was a part of this conversation, when we brought the current CEOs, Black CEOs together, people of color CEOs together in a room back in 2018, that was the first time that they were ever together themselves. And, you know, it was interesting because a lot of them didn't feel safe. They felt like, wow, we're CEOs, but if someone walks in, they'll wonder what we're doing, right? And we've kept that conversation, we call it the Black Leader Circle conversation, because they need a place to come together and talk about what leadership is going on in their lives. And so we're excited about birthing that as well. But I'll stop there and just take questions if you have any.
No, thanks, Harold. Appreciate that. And we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions. So if you have a question, you can pop it in the chat, or you can feel free to just sort of chime in here. Harold, I'll ask another question a little bit deep because I don't want to have to answer it myself. So the question is then, when we talked about board service, then with the current cohort, what was the feedback around board when we talked about social networking and board? What was the feedback around who was serving on boards and the connectivity?
Yeah, we talked about the cohort needs to get on boards or get on committees, because here's the other part. When you're going through search firms and they ask you a question about, have you ever fundraised? And if you are an operations person, perhaps you never dive into fundraising. Well, this is an opportunity, if you join a board, to perhaps join the fundraising committee to build up a skill. Also, it's an opportunity to network and build out some of that social capital. We also talked about, are there groups that we should join, such as Rotary? What does Rotary do for us? There was one organization say, hey, I have all Black people on my board. I need diversity in reverse. How does that work? How do I gain access to that social networking and social capital? So it was a wide range of conversations, not just in race, but also diversity in thought. I think we talked about that earlier. What type of thinking do we need on the board as well? And we also talked about sexual preference. There was one gentleman who informed us that he's married, he's in a top leadership role, and there was one job he was up for, and because of his sexual preference, they asked him those questions in the interview, right? Lawsuit, I would say. However, these things are coming up about, how do I network further? How do I build out my social capital? So when it's my time, people can vouch and swing me forward in building out that. And so, joining boards, being a part of committees, I always tell people, do something. If you want to build a muscle, join a board and do something different than what you're doing. I think that was good for me when I joined the board. My background is in operations. I wanted to join the fundraising committee because I didn't always have an opportunity to fundraise. And so when I have my opportunity, here's my demonstrated experience in that. So that's your question, Crystal?
It did. Because what I was trying to really get at is that we were, and this is the shift into a conversation or question that came up in the chat a little bit earlier around a data point that people are looking for diverse individuals to add to boards. So where should board members, nonprofit boards, or nonprofit executives be looking for diverse leadership to join boards? And then we said that there was a question around, looking for qualified candidates. So with respect to qualified, the question came up in the chat, and it was a question I had asked as well, is what does qualified look like? So when you're talking about qualified individuals being part of boards, considering what that looks like. So who has, I'd love to start a conversation right here around qualified candidates. And that's kind of how Harold's started with hearing whether or not people were qualified for, to be leading nonprofit boards. So I know Patrice, you put the question, I think were you initially want to put the question in the chat?
Yeah. And just to add to it, I think about, not only when I joined CCT and just being an HR person and like, what is the qualified occupational essential skill? And then my own personal experience around lived experience. Like lived experience is always going to be number one for me, and other skills that other folks that other folks bring to the agency. So to me, qualified is sort of a range based on the vision and mission of the organization and what, the relationship between the board and the operational leader and the strategic plan. Like, does this person somewhere, like, where can I locate this person's skill and experience on these three things? And I think it varies, but I also think that based on when I joined the board at CCT, qualified meant you have a title somewhere, you have access to legislators, and you can write a big check, right? And very loosely defined. And not that anything is wrong with those, but when those become the sole criteria, the trust that Gemini talked about is not even built into the equation. And so what we found, and what I was sort of fascinated that people that had been on CCT's board for a very long time really didn't have a good understanding of what we actually do. And that has dramatically changed, right? People are engaged with the work very differently today than just a few years ago, just by that small shift. So I'm curious just to hear from others, and why I put that question is like, how are we defining qualified, particularly from traditionally white boards or white board members that may not have access into the community or deeply rooted into the community, was where the question came from.
I'd love to add a little to that, because I felt unqualified when I was asked to be on this board 6 years ago. I'm like, me? Really? What do I have to offer? And a lot of it came down to passion and curiosity. Like, I wanted to know what was going on. I cared. I had been looking for something in the healthcare space because that's what I cared about, and underserved populations, and had run into Don Jonas at a Healthy Charlotte event and started talking about I didn't know the organization, and became very interested and engaged. And passion is what showed through. So I cared, and I was sharing with friends and bringing it to my other healthcare friends. So I think that's a big part of it. There's a lot of, there are people in the world who want to check the box. I'm on a board. And I think, that's kind of, one thing that I've never seen at Caring, really. We've all had people that cared about what we were doing. So that's, one area of qualification I'd look at, and love to hear what other people think.
If I could jump in for a second, when I'm thinking qualified too, and this some of the conversations that I have with some of my grantees, what are some gaps that you have within your board or within your organization? Oftentimes, especially from the grassroots lens, oftentimes people fill board seats with their family and friends, or people that they're comfortable with, someone that's not going to challenge them, right? So I'm thinking qualify. I'm thinking, do you have someone on your board who's questioning everything that you do? To me, that's a qualification, right? Because you don't want a board filled with yes sir and yes ma'am. You want a board filled with people who will be bold enough to tell you you're not fit to be an executive director, or your organization's strategic plan doesn't align with where this organization needs to be going. So I'm thinking qualify. I'm always thinking the gaps. What are some of the things that need to be filled? Oftentimes, what I see a lot is that a lot of organizations, again, they fill boards with people that they're comfortable and they know, but don't fill boards with the key things that they need. When I talk to my organizations, the first thing I tell them is you need 4 types of people on your board. You need someone who understands law and legal stuff. You need someone who understands HR policies and how to remove someone from your organization if you have to. You need someone who's a leader, a strong leader. You don't need again people on your board that are yes sir. You need someone who can really take you and be bold in that process. And then the last piece I tell them, you need someone who understands finances, because as a funder, those are the key things that I look for. Right? If your books isn't right, that tells me you're not you can have all the passion in the world, but that tells me you're not a solid organization. I cannot trust you with money. So I'm thinking qualify. Everything that Dean and Patrice have said is perfectly in line, but I'm also thinking about gaps, and also encouraging organizations, stop putting people on your board that you know. step outside the box, recruit somebody that otherwise wouldn't even fit for your board. And that's how I kind of position when I'm thinking qualifying things with agencies that I work with.
Okay, question in the chat. Are there resource groups in Charlotte that specifically help board members who are people of color, who help them prepare for the seat?
I don't know
I
if
think
there.
that sounds like a Black social capital.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know if there's
Like Harold.
sounds like an opportunity there for us. So, and we've had that conversation, Crystal and I, and Raquel Lynch, you may know, and Don Thomas, brother Don is what I call him. We've had that conversation, so sounds like an opportunity for us. Yeah, we're 1 year in, and hopefully some of the funders will continue to support us. We've had some good outcomes already. We've had one person to get a CEO role, another get a CPO role. So, and others have joined boards as a result of being in the cohort. So hopefully, with some more demonstrated experience, we can add to the program.
There's so much need for what you're doing, Harold. Obviously, it's gonna be a huge, incredible resource, I'm sure, for the nonprofit community. It's awesome. I know, Crystal, you and Harold are working together. It's amazing. And Pedro, you have your hand up. Did you have something?
Actually, I was just applauding.
Love it.
Awesome.
So I put up the wrong thing. Sorry.
That's okay.
I'll take it down.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
Crystal, just very
ahead,
quickly, I don't know if you guys still do this, but didn't the Lee Institute used to do like board preparation, how to serve on board workshops and things like that? I don't think it was specifically targeted to people of color, but then you guys do something to get the community excited and want to serve on boards. Do you guys still do that?
Yeah. So we have a program called Greater Good, and that's really about helping individuals get prepared to serve on nonprofit boards. What questions should you ask before joining a board? What information should you know? And it is around financials and how to read, the financials, what questions to ask, what a strategic plan looks like. So it's a program that really takes individuals who are looking for leadership roles in the community and prepares them so that when they do land on the board, they're ready to sort of sit back and learn about that organization that they are passionate about, and then be able to kind of hit the ground running. So yeah, we still do that. We still do that. Thanks, Sam. AW?
Yeah, I was saying, how do, Harold had mentioned the cohorts. How do we even start the process and awareness of the third cohort? Because I think a lot of times,
AW, we lose you? Or am I frozen?
I think we lost him.
Okay.
I think we lost him.
It's like I can't tell if it's me. Well, as soon as he comes back, I'll finish that. I know that, Harold, it sounds like a question about, what's the process for the Black Leadership Program.
I'll throw my email in the chat and contact number in the chat for you. Crystal's working with me on this. We're finishing up our website, so you'll be able to go to our website here in short order. But in the meantime, there may be a situation where you may get a spot in cohort 2. Who knows? You never know. Someone may move or relocate based on the job. So, but I'll send my information in the chat, and I'd love to do a one-on-one just to connect and go from there as well.
There you go. There you go.
No problem. My question or statement was, a lot of times as emerging organizations, grassroots organizations, what we don't know hurts us. So how do we even get on the radar as far as learning about like someone like a Harold having a cohort, how do we get that information to even participate?
Yeah, and I think we couldn't hear you. I'm going to send my information in the chat, so we can connect one-on-one, and that'll be my email and my phone number. Again, this year was we was underground this year, because we wanted to make sure that we had the right program mix. Cohort 1 is a great group, but I told them they're going to make the program a lot better for cohort 2 and cohort 3. And so we're going to make sure that feedback gets taken, and we take it in, and we redesign as we go. And also having the buy-in from the current CEOs that are currently in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, that are partnering with this effort as well. Because again, without them, there's no uniqueness to it. I think that's the great part, that the CEOs are saying, we're lifting as we're climbing as well. So it's important for them to be a part of the conversation as well. I myself, when I was coming through the ranks, I stalked Chris Jackson. I stalked him, and I said, "You're going to be my mentor," until he finally said yes. But I also stalked Laura Clark as well. I also stalked Catherine Sellers. So it's just not just one, but it's important to have someone that is in that seat that looks like you, to be able to talk you through some challenges, perhaps, that you will encounter at whenever you get into that role, or if you're not already. So I'll send it in the chat.
I appreciate that, because what I've seen, and obviously with successes and failures, is that power of collaboration, and where you get the intel, where you are part of that underground, where a lot of times people have been excluded for whatever various reasons, but like Leadership Charlotte, Share Charlotte has been an incredible resource. But again, if you're not made aware of it, and one of the things that I know to be true from, just like I said, some of the things that I've endured and encountered, was that people intentionally left you out. They knew about Share Charlotte, or they knew about NGAP, or they knew about this, that, and the other. And for whatever reason, call it competition, or call it hate, or whatever it may be, I think that's a barrier that we have to be made to understand too, that the power of collaboration is greater than the evils of what man has instilled in us. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
And then I have one last thing I was wanting to share. As we've had this great conversation, and with these folks, I could spend another however long just having a conversation and going deeper into some different things. But I did want to at least provide a couple of hopefully helpful nuggets around, do's and don'ts. And again, we'll make sure that we share this out. And if anybody has comments, feel free as I go through this. But these were just immediate things that I thought about as I was thinking about the do's and don'ts of, what you can do next around diversifying your boards. And the do's are identify the why, again, for your organization before asking the how. So often we want to dive into, hey, we should do this, and you don't know that it might be harmful to the people that you ask to be on the board if they're not asked the right way, or if they're brought on, and you really don't know how what your why is for wanting to engage those individuals. So do know your why before you start asking how. Discuss what happens if you don't increase diversity. So the part of the question is so what? So if we stay the course that we're on, what does that mean for the impact of our organization? So ask those tough questions of your organization internally. We talked about this already. Create a matrix and cast a wide net for board recruitment. If you're looking for members, what are other nonprofits doing? Who are your volunteers? Diverse business associations are out there. Fraternities and sororities, who are you connecting with? There are other community leaders, clients, customers, local colleges and universities. So there are places that you can tap into once you know what skills you're looking for and the demographics, and to be able to identify those people. Then you can go out and connect with those organizations to try to recruit. but build relationships with them before you ask them to join the project, the committee, or to support a project. My brief story is that I was at a meeting at one point, and I got asked the question. They were saying, you're very articulate. We need some additional Black people on our board. Would you be willing to join? And while I appreciated the candidness of being out there up front, that's not actually how you should do that. It's really about building relationships with individuals. I should be passionate about your organization. You should know who I am instead of exact what's on the outside or what you see here. And help in order to, again, if it's about building relationships and having those individuals. What's your intent around diversifying your board? Involving your board members in ways that they can best engage in. So again, finding what those comfort levels are. Don't be status quo. So if your board has operated a particular way, your bylaws look a particular way, how are you adjusting those to really make sure that you can maximize the skills of those board members you bring on so that they feel comfortable and that they belong on that board? Again, so that goes back to considering requirements. How often do you meet? What are the financial commitments that might be a barrier? Taking a look at what those look like. And if there are bylaws or things that restrict it, you're the board. You can make those adjustments. Make those adjustments as people are coming, before people come on, because again, you all have that power and influence to be able to do that. And then continuously monitor the progress through meaningful conversations. You should be having tough conversations in order to move your organization forward. Don't shy away from those, but make sure that you're digging into those. And on the don't side, it's really, don't assume that everyone agrees about diversity, equity, inclusion. I mentioned that at the beginning. Just because a couple of folks might feel like D&I, we need to really be pushing this. If the entire board doesn't agree, it can create that toxic environment that Mark talked about earlier. How are you making sure that your board is coming together and that you are having really good conversations about the direction of the organization? Ask internal stakeholders about ways, don't ask them about ways to change if you're not going to do it. The worst thing you can do is start asking questions that are, challenging. Hey, we're going to do this, or what are your thoughts about? And then there's no real plan to execute or implement. Make sure that you're going into those conversations in a meaningful way with intent. Don't immediately ask individuals to become part of the board. I already talked about that. Don't create situations for tokenism. No board member wants to feel like they are serving or filling a quota. So again, knowing what your why is and the skills that those individuals bring to the table is very important. And then don't focus on diversity without inclusion or equity. A seat at the table doesn't mean much if the voice doesn't matter. So putting someone on the board and just having them there as a warm body is not a good use of anyone's time. So I just wanted to share that again, and considerations as your board is trying to determine how and where you seek out diverse candidates and what that looks like and what diversity looks like for your organization. So we'll check the chat. All right. Other questions, comments? We're almost at time. All right. Well, I'll just say thank you so much to our special, as I call it, a special guest, Caring, CCT, United Way, and Black Social Cap. Thank you for sharing your information with us and your time and your treasure. I really appreciate it. I didn't give them much guidance, and I trusted that all of them knew me well enough that we could just all lean in. So I appreciated you for that. Thanks again, Julie, for having me and be able to create a space for this conversation. I really appreciate all of that. And again, for those who had questions and for showing up here on this gorgeous, at least it is here, Friday morning, to discuss, how you all can continue to move your organizations forward.
So awesome. Crystal, we are so grateful. So many notes over here that I've taken. I'm sure that I hope that we all feel that way, that we have actually some great actionable things to take back. And I love that you wrapped with the do's and don'ts, right? Like this is, now we need another hour to unpack some of that, but I'm just kidding. We're going to be free in just a second, but we're right at time. It was just perfect, Crystal, and thank you so much. I'll echo her just gratitude for our special guest this morning, because it really took us along this amazing timeline of how you begin and then how to maybe put some things into action. And so with that, I will close us out with 2 minutes to spare. Y'all have a great weekend, and thank you again for joining us this morning.